Paul Symon, welcome to ASPI.
Thanks, Grant.
Paul, why was the Australian Secret Intelligence Service created?
Well, we need to turn our minds back to the early 50s. The service was created in May 1952. Why was it created? Well, in the early 50s, of course, we had a generation of political leaders, government bureaucrats, officials who had served in the Second World War. They had, in many cases, been part of the intelligence community when Australia was at war and defending itself. And I think that by 1952, we've got the Korean War underway, we've got the Cold War underway, we've got concern that the Cold War would become a hot war. I think there was very much a sentiment amongst the political leadership and many senior officials that Australia needed to have an arm of government that could collect intelligence, foreign intelligence, and it could undertake what it called special operations in those days.
And what were those roles?
So there were two primary roles. When the service was created on the 13th of May 1952, Menzies, Prime Minister Menzies of the day, signed off on the charter for the Australian Secret Service as it was known originally. And that charter is framed in my office. It basically directs its first director of the Australian Secret Service, Alfred Deakin Brooks, the grandson of Alfred Deakin, the nephew of Norman Brooks, a winner of Wimbledon for Australia, so a sort of storied family in Melbourne, directs him to do two things. Undertake the collection of intelligence offshore, foreign intelligence, and secondly, conduct special operations. And the way special operations were defined was very much, if you like, in the manner in which the military in the Second World War had undertaken special operations, clandestine operations, sabotage operations, those types of activities envisaged in a time of war. So it was that arm of government that would be able to undertake paramilitary operations, but at arm's length from the government.
The culture clash between ASIS and External Affairs in that first decade. ASIS is based in Melbourne, not in Canberra. ASIS looks towards the British Secret Intelligence Service, which is referred to as head office. On post, under diplomatic cover, ASIS officers sometimes come up against their ambassadors who worry about the dangers of spying. And ultimately, the head of External Affairs, Arthur Tang, seeks to abolish ASIS. How do those origin stories shape your service?
I think it was a significant factor in the formative years of ASIS. For those in the diplomatic service in the early years, I can read into the history a very real anxiety about having the overt and covert elements of government working in parallel. With ASIS having cover departments like Defence and like External Affairs, brings to the fore concerns about, well, if mistakes are made, who carries the can? And probably in the early days, when the service hadn't built up the sort of centre of gravity you need to be a foreign espionage service, I think there was probably very real concern that the risks outweighed the benefits, and that any gems of intelligence that we provided for the Australian government were going to be few and far between. So I think what our predecessors did in the 50s is, I think that they concentrated their efforts very much on relationship with our British friends, as you characterised. They helped considerably with the training and the development of our capability. They've always had a very strong technical bent, use of technology, secret writing and all of these sorts of capabilities, and they were very, very helpful to ASIS in its early years. But I think, I think there was anxiety both with the early officers of ASIS and it's clear, as you highlight, in the mandarins running the Australian Public Service at that time, very real concern that the risks would outweigh the benefits. And, I think there's a central thread as I look through our history in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and on. Our relationship ebbs and flows. And now, obviously, later we'll talk about how things are now, but it was clear to me that it was very fragile in the early years.
Just reflect on that, though. How today would you describe that ASIS relationship with the mothership, with Foreign Affairs?
I think it's very, very strong. It's a very good relationship. We do talk about the overt and the covert work well in parallel. We're not the silver bullet. We don't pretend to be the silver bullet. The lion's share of advancing Australia's interests is undertaken by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and they do a very, very good job. But as we'll talk about, I'm sure at some stage, there is a role for intelligence diplomacy. Sometimes messages are better delivered by intelligence chiefs rather than diplomats. So I think we've refined the relationship in a way that brings the best out of both entities for the Australian government.
That first decade led to the establishment in 1974 of the first Hope Royal Commission. And Justice Robert Hope supports the role, the continued existence of ASIS, and he sets down these markers, direction, control, accountability to government. What does that mean for ASIS? What those markers that were put down, what does it mean?
It pretty well means everything in the way that we go about doing our business, in the way we train our people. Hope made sure that there was a legal basis and a proper basis for us to undertake our functions. He articulated what those, the legality and propriety of the work that we did. He articulated, as he looked at us on a number of occasions, the sort of accountability that we needed to have both to political masters, ultimately to an Inspector General, to Parliament. So accountability was a very key component of what Hope did. But in the early reports, he made very clear a range of delineations that remain important to this day. Delineation between security intelligence, so domestic intelligence, that undertaken by ASIO, and foreign intelligence, that undertaken by the Secret Intelligence Service, so foreign and domestic. He differentiated between collection and assessment, and didn't merge the two into a hybrid the way the Americans have with the Central Intelligence Agency. He delineated between intelligence, the intelligence function, and the law enforcement function. He specifically addressed the privacy of Australians and the special requirements that intelligence agencies have to do to protect the privacy of Australians. And the other thing that Hope did, I think, very, very well, for which the legacy continues to this day, is the delineation between intelligence assessment and policy. So within that formidable mind of Hope, with a Supreme Court background, a judicial background, an extraordinary array of specification of functions, a delineation of separations, that as recently as 2 years ago by Michael Lestrange and Stephen Merchant, they really strengthened and confirmed the original settings that Justice Hope gave us in the 1970s.
So those original settings, the division between collection and analysis, how important though that he did reject things like, say, the hybrid American model, the Central Intelligence Agency model? How important was that in the way Australia set itself up?
I mean, I think it's very important. I think that there is a risk if collection and assessment are merged that one can contaminate the other. Contaminate's perhaps a too harsh a word to use, but there can be a tendency that one leads the other in ways that are unhealthy. We, as a collection agency, are working to the intelligence requirements of the assessment agency. So they set out for us what their intelligence requirements are. And it may be human intelligence that answers the question. It might be signals intelligence, it might be cyber, it might be open source. But as a general rule, the assessment agencies are calling the shots to say, okay, here are our requirements that we're trying to answer in the national interest and for policymakers. Collection agencies, can you answer those questions? How will you answer those questions? In what time frame? And with what degree of confidence have you got in answering those questions? The challenge for us is to answer as many of those questions as we can with the highest level of confidence that we can. So there's a dynamic tension, I think, between assessment and collection that is very positive, and I think allows me as a Director General of a collection agency to focus the resources of the agency, the training, the experience, the expertise, on that very difficult function of collecting secret intelligence, separate of those individuals who are looking across a range of agencies and picking the eyes out of which intelligence they will use for their assessments.
It's interesting, Hope is creating this, in many ways, unique Australian way of doing it, but he's also putting it in the much larger framework of what we share with the United States, with Britain, and Australia has to do its share. So that element of partnership with the US and Britain particularly, how does that influence the way you think?
I think Hope was very astute in realising that there needs to be give and take, and it remains to this day in human intelligence. If you want to have a relationship with a counterpart organisation, it can't just be take. You actually have to put some crown jewels on the table to get some crown jewels off, and that's the way we work. It's interesting when you look at, for example, the conflict between Hope and Sir Arthur Tang. Hope, a brilliant judicial mind, Tang, a sort of Mandarin with great power here in the federal government. One of those tensions was that Tang was arguing that Australia, small population, national interest could be well served either through open source, through media, and through the help of our British, American and other friends. And so he really argued very strongly for a very, very modest intelligence architecture in Australia. He didn't see that we would have to actually carve out our own intelligence requirements supporting our own national interest in the way that we do today. Hope, I think, very astutely recognised two issues. One is that it's this issue I'm talking about. It's give and take. You've actually got to step up to the plate if you want quality intelligence back. You've got to give quality to receive quality back. But I also think he saw there was a great nationalism, I think, in the way Hope looked at the Australian intelligence community. He wanted a community that could stand on its feet in Australia's national interest. And of course there's going to be partnerships and cooperation. But at its heart, he had a more ambitious, I think, view of the Australian intelligence community in the decades to follow, than Arthur Tang did, and I think we're the beneficiaries of his vision.
Just as Hope placed ASIS clearly within the architecture of what he called the Australian intelligence community, how does that intelligence community idea, how does that clarify your identity and where you fit into that Australian model?
Well, I mean, he set up a community effectively of 6 agencies, of which 2 were assessment agencies, ONA, Office of National Assessments, now the Office of National Intelligence, and what was then JIO, Joint Intelligence Organisation, DIO, which I was a director for 3 years as well when I was in the military. So the 2 assessment agencies supported by 4 collection agencies, ASIO, ASIS, Geospatial, and the SIGINT agency, DSD, now ASD. Now, of course, so the delineation I talked about earlier between assessment and collection was clarified by Hope and really became the basis for articulating the functions that each service had, that ultimately in the Intelligence Services Act of 2001, which we'll come to, but very clear alliteration of what our functions, our lawful functions were. It described for all of the agencies what our roles and functions were. So there is no doubt when an officer joins ASIS and they're briefed on the community and then they're briefed on specifically what our lawful and proper functions are, that dominates their education, their training, their knowledge from day one. And there's a simplicity and a clarity which I would say is not reflected in many counterpart organisations we see around the world, and we deal with many counterpart organisations. So he gave us that clarity. Now, of course, Michael Lestrange and Steve Merchant a couple of years ago went further with the community, and they broadened the community to a total of 10 agencies. But again, that clarity has followed through in the way the Australian intelligence community views itself.
Hope comes back to ASIS in his second Royal Commission after that infamous exercise, the training exercise at Melbourne's Sheraton Hotel in 1983, which he called poorly planned, poorly supervised, poorly run. Tell me about that training exercise, what that meant to ASIS.
ASIS had developed a covert directorate, a small group of officers who were undertaking, if you will, sort of paramilitary training. The Director General of the time, a fellow by the name of John Ryan, ultimately sacked for the Sheraton Hotel incident, had given these officers in the service great licence to train to a variety of sort of scenarios. And in this particular case, using the young recruits who were at our training facility. So, young recruits really not knowing which way's up, which way's down, doing as they're told and being trained to whatever standards the service and to whatever scenarios the service set for them. With a component of the staff who had this sort of covert directorate function that was being very tightly controlled by the Director General of the time. And so really we set ourselves up for disaster. When you develop special techniques and special activities or special operations without the proper imprimatur, in this case, the proper knowledge of the political masters who ultimately have that political responsibility for you. When you compartment the information and then you start encouraging training activities in ways that don't go through the normal sort of risk management processes, the normal proper planning that goes through, then that's when disasters like the Sheraton Hotel incident occur. I mean, sadly for ASIS, it was around the same time when, you know, people could smoke cigarettes on aeroplanes. It was a long, long time ago. And the problem for ASIS is all those years ago it gained a prominence because of how badly the activity went, that sort of hangs around us to this day, which is very unfortunate when you think of the literally thousands of activities we do that are incredibly successful, for which we hold the successes quietly to ourselves.
Institutionally, though, Hope recommends that covert action function be abolished. What does that mean, that amendment to the directory to abolish the attack function, and that agents at that stage then could not carry weapons?
Well, it meant, I mean, just that. They quietly abolished that covert directorate. They took that off the establishment, and those people were moved out of the organisation. And weapons were not. People were not trained in the use of weapons, and the arsenal was removed from ASIS. And indeed, even with the instigation of the Intelligence Services Act in 2001, there was an express prohibition on the use of weapons in 2001. Subsequently, 2004, reintroduced back into ASIS for self-defence purposes, and it's evolved since then. But what had been an element of ASIS that was very closely connected to the military or former military officers, that comprised a big part of that element of the service, was largely ripped out at that point in time. And I think in some respects allowed ASIS to develop its own internal culture with not quite the same close connection to former military officers.
The weapons ban, though, has slowly been wound back. Agents could, first of all, get weapons for self-protection as of about 2004. And then in 2018, the government legislates to broaden the right to use weapons to employ reasonable force. What is the weapons rule now for your officers serving overseas?
Officers can use reasonable force. They cannot use violence. They can. There's a series of definitions in the way the law has defined what we can do. So really, Graham, we're talking at the low end of the spectrum of using self-defence techniques where lethal force is inappropriate, but there might be scenarios where using proportionate, low-level techniques to achieve an outcome is appropriate. So in getting this legislation through, actually both sides of politics were briefed on some of the scenarios. And as we've found over the years with ASIS, actually both sides of politics have benefited from, you know, a capable ASIS that is able to achieve outcomes in the national interest. So really what we did is we mapped out some scenarios. Some of the ones that particularly resonated on both sides of politics is scenarios where there might be an Australian national who's being held hostage overseas. It might be Africa or a place like that. Let's say there's a scenario where the company that the individual is working for is willing to pay the ransom, or family and friends are willing to pay the ransom. Well, which arm of government is going to help with that transaction? Now, there are a range, but we are one of them. So you can paint quite easily some scenarios where you're trying to achieve an outcome here. You're trying to release an Australian national who's been held hostage. But the circumstances of effecting that transfer, it might be in the middle of the night, there might be disorientation, there might be a whole range of reasons why the individual who doesn't really know what's going on needs to be moved physically from one location, into the back of a vehicle or whatever. And of course it's in their interests, but they might also resist because of the disorientation, the shock, and the like. So I was really worried about some scenarios that I could see where I was concerned that our officers might be at some legal peril if we weren't able to use proportionate, low-end force, clearly not in the violent or grievous bodily harm, nothing like that. But in that low end of the spectrum, there are quite a number of scenarios that I was able to paint for both sides of politics, and they said, we understand, and that was the reason that those changes were made.
Looking at that legislation, it's not about giving ASIS a paramilitary or an attack function. No. That element of the tradition is maintained.
That's correct. Yeah. No, that's exactly right, Graham. It's not. I guess this is threading where you started the interview. This is not creating that covert directorate per se that I was talking about, or the Sheridan type incident where you're using offensive action to achieve an outcome. The Australian government has, the military able to undertake those activities far better than we can. But I really was able to paint a number of scenarios where an agency like ASIS can undertake activities at arm's length from government, but have the skills and the training to be able to use self-defence techniques, use pepper spray, those types of non-lethal capabilities to achieve an outcome proportionate to the risks at play.
You started your life as an army officer, you've served as an intelligence officer in the military. What would you say are the similarities and the differences between the military approach and the approach you have now with ASIS?
Probably I'd answer that in two ways. I mean, I think that there are a lot of similarities between the military and ASIS, whether it's more broadly or the function of intelligence. People who join the military, people who join ASIS, have a operational disposition. They're not. They understand risk. They train with risk. I would say that they know that informed and calculated risk is at the heart and soul of what they're trained to do. So there are a lot of cultural similarities. There are some differences. I mean, in ASIS, a very important component of our culture is that all of our successes, of which I would say there are many, are celebrated very quietly. So there is very much a culture inside ASIS of quiet achievement, and we celebrate our successes very quietly inside the organisation. Whereas for a whole range of reasons in the military, success is celebrated quite publicly and is an important part of the culture. From an intelligence perspective, I mean, my main association has been either as a commander, where I received assessments to help inform my understanding of military capability, military intentions, or in the Middle East, non-state actors, what their capabilities and intentions were. So it was very much a bias towards assessment, whereas of course in ASIS it's actually at its heart and soul it is the cultivation, the recruitment and the validation of agents who are betraying the secrets of their nation. We are building a relationship with them and then bringing that information, that intelligence back to the nation. So really quite similar but quite different in many ways.
Before you joined the Army, you worked in retail.
Yeah.
How did that service experience in your early life affect the way you view the service that you're now running?
So I don't overplay my retail experience. My family had a business in F-Shed Victoria Market since 1885. So
a people business.
It was a people business, but we sold everything. And from a very young age, I was selling shopping trolleys, doormats, luggage, clothing, just about anything in F-Shed Victoria Market. It did a couple of things for me. One is we had to deal with an extraordinary array of customers, from from overseas. So one thing you do learn in retail is the ability to talk, to get to know people, to like people. But the other thing is, and I guess it goes to your question about what it's like to go from retail to government. Government really is a model employer, and when you work in a family business, when you work in retail, when you work at the Victoria market, it's hard to provide for your people in the way that government provides for its people. So sometimes at work, if I seem a little bit frustrated when staff raise issues about entitlements and salaries and things like that, I sometimes have to sit on my hands and remind myself that, I need to remind them that there are a lot of people out there in different industries, in different walks of life. They don't quite have the same benefits and support that we do working for the Australian government.
But it's starting in a market in the Victoria market. You're now working, and again, in a very interesting set of markets as well. So to that extent, it is about what you can trade and what you can do with what you're trading.
Well, that's very true, and the art of persuasion.
Paul Symon, thank you.
Thanks, Ray.